Hi, my name is Luke Meekin. I'm a first-year PhD candidate in Art Ed here at Penn State, and my creative teaching and research practices focus in part on new media art. The name of my talk for the Wikipedia Edit-A-Thon is called lossy compression, which comes from a computer term for when information is removed from a file to make it smaller and more efficient to store and transmit. In contrast with lossless compression, lossy compression always results in a degradation of the original file. This is visible as artifacting on heavily compressed images, such as the 3 JPEGs of these 3 new media artists on the screen right now, Mika Satomi, Mimi Onuoha, and Leah Schoenfelder. None of these 3 women have Wikipedia entries. Nor are they listed in Wikipedia's index of new media artists. Reflecting on the purpose of today's Edit-A-Thon, I think that the history and the present story of new media art has been subjected to a form of lossy compression, one which has conspicuously omitted the contributions and voices of women. I teach new media arts camps every summer through the Smithsonian. And before starting doctoral work here at Penn State, I taught new media arts in a public high school in Central Virginia for 4 years. In developing curricula and material for these classes and camps, such as the curriculum website you can see screenshotted on the right, I aimed to do what any responsible art teacher does when planning their lessons, and have gender parity in the artists we looked at and discussed. In order to do this, I had to do a fair bit of research well beyond the mostly male artists I was taught about in art school, and well beyond the new media artists listed on Wikipedia, 2/3 of which are men, and the ratio is much worse 4 years ago when I was putting together these curricula. The omission of women new media artists from Wikipedia was especially a challenge for my student-centered teaching practice when I was teaching high school, because I encouraged students to independently investigate the field of digital art to find work that resonated for them. For example, my high schoolers worked on a project where they independently researched the work of a chosen new media artist and then developed an online web resource with work and information about them, some of which are pictured on the right. A recent study by the online ad firm Chitika found that 92% of people don't go past the first page of search results on Google, and almost a third go to the very first link Google yields, which for a search of new media art would be the Wikipedia entry on it. This meant that, left completely to their own devices, right, the main portal through which my student researchers would begin learning about new media art and choosing subjects for their research projects would be through Wikipedia's androcentric list of new media artists. Incidentally, the artists in those screenshots on the right, those student websites, none of them have Wikipedia pages. Beatrice Lartigue, Mika Satomi, and Yuri Suzuki. At the time, I addressed the issue by curating a list of artists for students to choose from, which included more women and queer and people of color artists, but a more permanent solution, and one that events like this Edit-A-Thon can put into effect, would be to remedy Wikipedia's omission of women new media artists. I've talked about the relevance to my classroom of Wikipedia's new media art representation, eliding women, but now I want to share some numbers that may indicate a broader importance to correcting these omissions. First, a couple of anecdotal measures. In my tech art summer camps since 2014, about 60% of the students have been women or girls. In this graph, you can see I do have categories for non-binary and students whose gender identity is not articulated well by the terms male, female, or non-binary. In my classes, at least in terms of student presentation and self-identification, I've only had male and female students, or at least ones that have presented that way and been out that way to me. But I am acknowledging those categories in my count and will obviously adjust it in the future as needed. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't erasing those groups despite the fact that they happened to not be in my classes so far. But yeah, so the majority of my students have been women or girls. I was recently at the Programmed Rules, Codes, and Choreographies art exhibition at the Whitney in New York. This was a large-scale exhibition curated by Christiane Paul, one of the most notable new media curators in the country. She also happens to be a woman. That's her on the left there. And the ratio was more than reversed, right? About 68% of the artists in the exhibit were men, and only about 33% or 33% were women, right? So what's going on here, right? To look at some less anecdotal and isolated data, we can look at the gender breakdown of people graduating from art programs and entering the worlds as arts professionals. And these government statistics are completely binary and don't include any measures for non-binary artists. So these visualizations of that data perpetuate that erasure that comes from the original data, unfortunately. In traditional studio arts, painting, drawing, printmaking, and ceramics on the left there, and fiber arts and sculpture, 70% of the degrees awarded to new artists entering the field are awarded to women, right? In new media arts, on average, only about 43% are, and the breakdowns are more specific there on the further right. So how do we explain this apparent disparity, right? On the left is what I'm seeing in my camps and classrooms. On the right is what seems to be happening in the field, right? How do we explain this? How do we explain this disparity where most of the kids I teach who are excited about this medium are girls and women, but most of those pursuing it in higher ed and in the professional spheres are not women, right? There are many factors, but one that seems relevant to this conversation, and which has data to back it up, is here. This data is discussing STEM fields in general, but I found that some of the same gendered baggage and pressures apply within digital arts as STEM more broadly, right? And it shows here, right, that girls are more encouraged to engage with digital culture and materials when they have role models that help them see themselves in this field. What's important about this study, done by Microsoft, incidentally, and you can see it's focusing on European countries. Again, there are biases in play. But what's important here is this study was specifically looking at role models other than teachers and parents, focusing on the importance of visible figures in the field, including even fictional figures in pop culture, on the interest of these students, right? So an example would be what new media artists come up on a Wikipedia search, right? How are these sorts of figures who are not direct actors in the students' lives influential in their level of interest in engaging with digital materials? So where will girls see these role models? When common repositories of cultural knowledge like Wikipedia leave them out? Or when the most visible and powerful awards-granting bodies in the digital arts overwhelmingly recognize and celebrate men. This is an example from the Kiss My Rs hashtag, right? Highlighting how 9 out of 10 of the Prix Ars Electronica awards have gone to men. And on the right, there's just an excerpt from an observation by artist, technologist, and activist Adi Waganacht, who drolly noted that the award statue itself is of a dismembered, headless woman, right? And how does that reflect on the attitudes of the Ars Electronica organization and its awarding priorities, right? So, in terms of our call to action for our Wikipedia Edit-A-Thon, I've compiled a Google Sheet of women new media artists, drawn in part from my own curricula and research, as well as from a substantial list compiled by new media artist Golan Levin that he has available online. It's publicly accessible at the URL in the URL in the upper right, and each artist has toggles to the right that are publicly editable, indicating whether that artist is on Wikipedia and whether that artist is listed on Wikipedia's listing of new media artists, which would be the first page that comes up in a search. So parts of this sheet are editable. So as people are added, or as you add people to Wikipedia, you can change the N's to Y's. Or if you're listing someone on the new media artists list, you can change that N to a Y. and the percentages on the right will update themselves. Presently, only 33% of the artists on this list are on Wikipedia, and only 10% of them are listed on Wikipedia's new media art page, where they'll actually be seen by a student who does a Google search for new media art, right? So, specific kind of marching orders. There are 3 different levels of engagement that you can participate in today, depending on your level of comfort and knowledge with this field. The most easy way to make a difference is to take artists who already have wiki entries, but who aren't on that new media artist list, and simply add them to the list, right? So if someone does have a Wikipedia entry, like Adrienne Siegel does, but she's not listed on the new media artist page where she would be most visible, a really easy, low-impact way to make a significant difference is just to add her name and a link to her page on the new media artist page. Right? That requires no additional research on your part. You're just increasing the visibility of an artist who's already on Wikipedia. Slightly more involvement would be to find artists who have stubs or entries that need editing and revise them. There are not very many of these in my list, or at least that I've marked that way on my list, but you can see some artists like Andrea Crespo here. Her listing on Wikipedia is yellow rather than red or green, indicating that that entry is tagged as a stub or in need of revision. Or the more involved one, but one that can possibly affect even more change, is to create new entries for artists who have no Wikipedia page yet, right? Some of the artists listed on the sheet have descriptions, which might help sort of direct your interest in people. Or, again, beyond the scope of today's Edit-A-Thon, if you are an educator, right, this is a publicly shareable document. This would be a great idea to have a project for your students to research new media artists. And maybe rather than writing a paper for you that you have to grade, they create a new entry on Wikipedia for that artist. So they're not just doing something for your class, but they're contributing to a broader change in the field or things like that. So there's multiple ways to kind of take this both today and beyond today. So that's kind of the resources I've shared and the sort of task I'm suggesting for our Edit-A-Thon. Thanks so much for listening. And if you have any questions about the resource I have here or about this topic in general, feel free to let me know. Thanks.